Welcome back to the workshop. I'm Josh and I'm here with Steve, the designer of the new Precision Adjust knife sharpener. And that's what we're talking about in this episode or this video. We're gonna go over a video user's guide. We'll talk about the different components, how they go together, how to sharpen different types of knives, and how to store and maintain your sharpener. First things first, let's get the Precision Adjust out of the box and I'll show you the different components so you can get it put together and get your sharpener right away. Not to be overlooked, you will see the instructions inside. This video is a great opportunity to get a little bit of insight and see how everything goes together, but read through these instructions. They're not that long. We did a really good job putting together some valuable information, and our customer service team would really appreciate it if you at least read these before you call them. There's a few key components that make up the Precision Adjust. First up is the Sharpening Base. It's this base unit that has great rubber feet that sit on your work surface. They should grab the surface pretty well, and it's the platform for all the other pieces to rest upon. Next up is the Sharpening Chassis, or this tower. The tower snaps into the base, just like Steve's showing, and provides most of the framework for the different components that fit onto the sharpener. Next up is the tri-abrasive sharpening rod that clamps into the sharpening chassis. The tri-abrasive rod has a coarse, a medium, and a fine grit abrasive. It's a coarse 320 diamond, a medium 600 diamond, and then the fine ceramic. They rotate around the sharpening rod, and that's what you'll use to sharpen the knife. The rod snaps into the chassis with a magnet and has this, what is that, a ball joint?
Called rod end bearing, but yeah. Has a post here. On the bottom of the chassis here, you'll see a hole, and you just place that post right in the hole, gets pulled up and held in by a magnet. So it's held in place there. If you ever want to remove it, you just push down and it pops right back out so you can get it out of your way.
Last up is the clamp mechanism. Steve, I know this was a huge piece of the design of the sharpener was the clamp so that you have a really good purchase. Tell us about what makes that clamp really special.
Well, some of the really cool features about this is there's a knob right here on the clamp base. You rotate that and that's what releases the jaws. You'll remove this card that we have in there. As you release it, you can open the jaws. You'll notice on the side of it there's a V-shaped in the clamp plate here that allows us to place the knife in, so the spine of the knife goes into that V that gives you a precise location every time you put that knife back in there, so it's repeatable. Every time you put the knife in there, it goes to the exact same depth. The other thing it does is now that V holds the spine of the knife while the two clamp jaws, when you tighten them down, hold the actual blade, so you get more points of contact, which gives you a really stable platform. We'll get into clamping a knife in just a moment. What I want to show now is just how easy it is to put the clamp into the chassis itself. You'll see two fingers sticking out here. There's a couple ribs on the sides. We just line those up, and it just slips back into the chassis. And there's some magnets and pins that hold everything into place so it's nice and stable inside the chassis.
All right, so let's get this set up to sharpen. I'm going to put a kitchen knife in the clamp. Steve's going to get a pocket knife set up.
First, we'll just rotate the knob to loosen the jaws up. You can hold them spread open a little bit. Place the spine of your knife in first, and as I stated earlier, all the way into that V guide. And place your fingers on the Worksharp logos there to hold the jaws, to clamp the jaws down with your fingers, getting the edge of your knife, the cutting edge, parallel with the outside of the ends of the clamp jaws. Now we just rotate the clamp or the knob, tighten the clamp down, and now we're nice and tight in there.
And you said to try to clamp in the middle of the blade, not too far towards the heel or the tip, but
Yes.
right in the middle.
Yeah.
And that helps keep it, symmetrical with the rod.
Exactly, yeah. Try to center your knife blade in the clamp. When we're inserting the knife and the clamp into the chassis, there's an indicator mark right here on the chassis. You want the mark to be facing up, and you want the handle of your knife will be facing to your right. And we'll explain why in just a moment. So we place those in there. As we go from side to side on the knife, there's a button in the back that we're going to depress, which allows us to rotate the knife over so we can sharpen the other side of it. And that's why it's important to align the mark in the handle, otherwise the handle comes down and hits the table and keeps you from rotating around.
Gotcha. For large blade knives, you can do the same process. When you depress that knob in the back or the button in the back, make sure to tip the sharpener up so that you have clearance to rotate that tip around underneath.
Another way to do this, if you're not comfortable leaning it back, is you can always just reach up and pull the clamp out, carefully rotate that over, hanging onto the clamp, and then reinsert to get to the second side of your knife also, if you're not comfortable doing it, leaning that back.
Some folding knives, you'll be able to actually fold the knife up if you do want to just guard that edge as you're manipulating it. It doesn't work with every knife, and obviously fixed blade knives, there's no way to cover that up. Just keep in mind where the blade's at and maintain safety. Now, before we jump into sharpening our knife, we have to determine what angle we want to sharpen at. That's one of the things I love about the Precision Adjust, is that you can determine the angle anywhere between 15 and 30 degrees on this lead screw here and the angle adjust knob. As you'll see, you have a macro scale on one side with 15, 20, 25, and 30 degree marks, and then incremental marks in the 1 degree increments in between. So we have 16, 17, 18, 19, and etc. moving up the right side. For a kitchen knife, this is a Wüsthof. I'm going to put a 20 degree edge on the knife, and I can just set that through the angle adjustment knob. Now that we've got our angle set at 20 degrees here, we're ready to start sharpening. The only thing left to do is to adjust the stop collars to make sure that the abrasive will come in contact with the full length, or that the blade will come in contact with the full length of the abrasive, but you're not going to be overextending and scratching the surface finish of your blade. Looks like I just need to adjust this top collar down a little bit. I find it's easiest to do that by twisting and sliding at once. The motion that we recommend for sharpening is a back and forth motion while working from heel to tip and then back again from tip to heel of the knife. It's just like most other sharpening methods. The goal here is to raise a burr on one side, flip the knife over, repeat the same amount of strokes or effort on that side to raise a burr, then switch and progress to finer grits, polishing and refining that edge. I'm starting on the coarse 320 grit. The first time you sharpen a knife on the Precision Adjust, you will likely want to start on the coarse grit to remove material so you can establish the consistent edge that you'll then be able to repeat next time with much less effort. I've got 320 set here, and the sharpening motion looks like this. Light pressure throughout the process is going to yield the best results, and don't be afraid to repeat as long as you need to be able to raise that burr. You can check for a burr by sliding your finger out and away from the edge on the opposite side of the bevel that you just sharpened. Once you've reached that burr or raised that burr, flip the knife over and repeat the same effort on the other side. After that, progress down to the 600 and then to the fine ceramic. You'll be left with a razor sharp knife. Steve's got a recurve set up in his Precision Adjust, and I'm curious, Steve, what do you keep in mind when sharpening a pocket knife or a recurve style?
It's basically the same process you just went through over here. We're going to use the same back and forth motion. With a recurve, they're generally difficult to sharpen on a flat abrasive, but with the abrasives on the precision adjust are 1/2 inch wide, so you can see when you drop it into the recurve, you're still going to fall down inside that recurve, and we're plated all the way out to the edges on our plate here, so it will still actually pick up that recurve as it sits inside. So you go, same process you were doing earlier on the kitchen. Just from heel to tip until we create that burr. Just rotate it over. Being it's a shorter knife, this rotates over without having to tilt it back. And then we just do the same process. Same amount of strokes.
And you said you'll count those back and forths independently, maybe up to 50 per side, depending on how much work you're doing to the knife.
Yes, if I'm setting a new, from taking it from say a 25 to a 17 or a 20, I'll count through and do like 50 strokes. Feel for a burr, flip it over, do 50 strokes again. But yeah, always try to do the same amount of strokes on both sides.
Yep.
All right, so once we're done with the 320, we have a burr the full length of the knife. We're going to rotate this back over to the first side of the knife again, and now we're going to rotate around the tri-abrasive around to get to the 600 grit. And then we're going to do the same process we did with the 320 to refine that edge. We'll rotate it over. Back to the first edge again, and then we'll go to the fine ceramic so we can come in and refine this down to a razor sharp edge and get rid of that burr. All right, now that we're done with our recurve blade, let's rotate the knob to loosen the jaws, pull the knife out, and we'll move on to the Tonto. So it's going to be the same process. We'll open the jaws, center the blade, get the blade so it's fairly parallel with the ends of your jaws. Tighten it again. Again, indicator mark is up. Handle to the right. I'm already at the 20 degree that I want this knife sharpened at. So we're just going to rotate back to the 320. The way to do this is to treat it as two different knives. You have your straighter edge here, the long straight edge, and then you have the actual Tonto that comes off at an angle. You want to sharpen the straight edge by itself and then come in and sharpen the Tonto edge by itself. That'll help you maintain that transition right there in between the two of them. So this is how we'll do this. Start here. Again, very light strokes. Try to get this so you can see it, but I'm stopping right at that transition. Not letting the abrasive go around that corner, keeping it nice and flat. Okay, now that we have a burr on that portion, we're just going to rotate this over, let the abrasive sit flat on it. And same thing, keep the abrasive flat so it doesn't roll around that transition. Rotate it back over. And do the same thing on this side. Remember to keep that abrasive flat so it doesn't roll past that transition. And just like we did with the recurve here, then we would rotate back through the 600 grit and onto the ceramic, doing those same strokes.
One of the things I forgot to mention earlier was specifically how you determine which angle you want sharpened on your knife, or what angle it was sharpened to before you are getting a hold of it to sharpen it. We've got some good guidelines in the user's guide. It says that kitchen knives, Eastern style kitchen knives should be 15 degrees, Western style kitchen knives should be 20. Outdoor or hunting knives that you're going to be using for fine use also can probably be around 20 degrees. And then if it's a harder working outdoor hunting knife, something like 25 degrees, that's usually what I'll do for some of my daily carry pocket knives, is 25 degrees. And then if it's anything that's a larger blade than that, kind of a bushcraft or a camp knife, I would go up to 30 degrees for that. We do have a video on our channel about how to determine the angle of your blade. We used a different tool. We used the angle set sharpener to show the Sharpie being removed from the bevel of the knife and using that as a gauge for what angle was on your knife before you sharpened it. So some maintenance and tips for this sharpener. Steve, how do I store the clamp to get the most life out of the clamp?
This thing for the clamp is one, remove the knife.
Yeah, put it back in your pocket, right?
Yeah, exactly. You can use a paintbrush or a stiffer bristle brush. I wouldn't recommend any metal, but just brush off any of the dust that's on there from the sharpening, any of the abrasive or the material from the steel. Get in there, clean off. There's rubber coating on the insides of this that hold onto the knife, gives it better grip, won't mar your knife. You want to make sure that's nice and clean. And then there's also the card back here. The card that came with it even says on here for optimal use. Place that card back in there. It just keeps the rubber from sitting on itself, and just come down just tight enough just until it grabs the paper. So now if that's nice and clean, ready to be stored, we'll switch over to the tri-abrasives. Again, push down on the rod end bearing, it just pops straight out. For the diamond, recommend again, just use a brush. Since we don't use any water or oil or anything, it's not going to really, the debris doesn't really stick to it. So we can just brush that off nice and clean. Same thing with the 600 grit and the handle or anything else. You know, the rod you can clean off. Make sure there's no grit stuck on that. The ceramic, you'll notice, starts to load up a little bit. You can see on here what little bit of sharpening we did over here. If you use a pencil eraser, you can come in and clean that off. It doesn't load up the ceramic or anything. Come back in, brush that off, and you can see all that loading is gone now.
And you can feel that cut again when you bring it back to touch up the next knife.
Yeah, I like to clean mine after every couple knives just to keep it nice and fresh so it's cutting really well.
Awesome. Good idea to brush down the whole unit. There are some magnets in the back of the chassis that hold that clamp. You can get some of the dust or debris out of there.
Good point you bring up. There is a magnet on the back of the clamp. That's what helps hold it inside the cup here. You can brush off the back of it, use your thumb. It sits barely proud or flush right there. You can use your finger to come in and get all the dust off of that magnet. So make sure you keep that clean. Careful where you set it. You know, if you've been sharpening here, don't come in and set your magnet down on it. And then for the whole unit, again, back to the brush. Just brush all the dirt and crud off of it.
One final piece of maintenance is for the tri-abrasive rod. The abrasives are replaceable on here. You'll slide the stop collars off of the sharpening rod, slide that unit off, and the tri-abrasive portion comes out. And these abrasives are individually replaceable and can be found on worksharptools.com. If there's any other portion of the sharpener that needs any attention or service, please get in touch with our customer service. Their information is in the user's guide, and you can find it online as well at worksharptools.com. This video is just a brief overview and more or less a video user's guide about how to use the Precision Adjust. There will be some more videos coming about some fun ways to get some really incredible edges or customized edges on your knives, but we'll save those for a couple episodes coming later this year. Steve, just before this, you were sharing some tips with me about how to create some really beautiful edges on your knives with this sharpener. What's just one of those right now?
The sharpener itself is really consistent, but one of the best ways I've found to get a really good edge is once you've gotten that burr, now you're progressing down through the rest of the abrasives, is you've already created a burr, so now we're just honing it. So as you start off with the 600, do a few strokes with it, flip it over, do a few strokes, and then the next step you do is go back to the 600, or stay with the 600, and do a couple less strokes. So you just want to keep lowering the amount of strokes you're doing all the way through, even with the ceramic. If you were talking, but as you're doing that, I started, you do about 10. The next set I do about 5. Then I'll drop it to 3. And the last one is just really light, and I'll come back in and I'll just go over that edge just one last time, just to make sure that we're knocking that burr down to where it's just gone and you have a really, really defined edge.
Let's see how you did.
One thing I always aim for in a tanto is you should be able to slice straight through that transition without it slowing down or catching.
It really does create a beautiful edge on your knife, and I hope you guys enjoy the new Precision Adjust. That's it, and we'll see you next week back here in the workshop.